Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to unpack two vastly different yet fundamentally connected sociological concepts. We'll be looking at the micro-level evolution of marriage on one hand and the macro-level escalation of communalism on the other. It's honestly a fascinating look at how we humans organize ourselves, scaling all the way from our most intimate domestic partnerships right up to the broad and sometimes volatile arena of national identity. Let's dive in. Our insights for today's explainer come directly from Study IQIS Sociological Notes. Now, this is a really fantastic resource for civil service aspirants, but honestly, it's equally fascinating for anyone just trying to make sense of the complex social fabric of India. It gives us a super clear, focused lens to view these emotionally charged topics without taking any sides. Here's our quick roadmap for today. We're going to cover the institution of marriage, modern shifts in legalities, understanding communalism, stages of escalation, and finally, the varieties of communalism. All right, starting with Section 1, the institution of marriage, defining the domestic sphere. So marriage, often referred to as vivaha in the traditional context, is universally recognized in India as a foundational cultural practice. The source defines it quite specifically as a socially approved relationship governed by both customs and laws. But what's absolutely crucial here from a sociological standpoint is its primary function. It's all about guaranteeing the survival of the family. It is literally the bedrock institution that ensures the societal unit continues from one generation to the next. And that brings us to a pretty stark legal reality. While traditional practices in the past may have allowed for polygamy, having multiple partners simultaneously, current standard Indian law strictly prohibits it. Monogamy, or eko vivaha, is the legal standard. You commit to one partner at a time, and the law only allows for a new partner under extraordinary circumstances, like the passing of a spouse or a legal divorce. Moving right along to Section 2, modern shifts and legalities. Let's see how this ancient institution is adapting to contemporary life.
We can actively trace some massive behavioral changes in modern relationships here. Traditionally, marriage was viewed strictly as a religious duty, but today, the focus has shifted heavily toward lifelong companionship. We've also got firm legal parameters in place, like the marriage age being set at 21 for boys and 18 for girls. But look at those last 2 points, because this is where it gets really interesting. The rise of urban nuclear families means couples have much less daily guidance from elders. You combine that with a modern emphasis on individuality and financial self-dependency, and the sociological result is a rising divorce rate, especially in Tier 1 cities. The stability of the institution is clearly evolving as our individual priorities shift.
And this cultural evolution is deeply legal, too. Back in 2010, a 3-judge bench of the Supreme Court of India made a landmark observation. They stated that living together without marriage is not an offense. It actually falls right under the right to life and liberty protected by Article 21. Furthermore, the source notes that in 2022, the Supreme Court observed that familial relationships can broadly include unmarried domestic live-in partnerships or even same-sex queer relationships. So the legal definition of what constitutes a family is actively expanding to match our contemporary reality. But it's really important to note the boundaries of this modernization. You might hear a lot of chatter about prenuptial agreements, especially in pop culture or the news, but legally speaking, in India, premarital agreements are not fully tenable. Why? Because the law still largely views marriage as a sacrament, not a business contract. The nuance here, though, is that certain separation terms can be implemented, provided they absolutely do not override existing religious-based personal codes, like the Hindu Marriage Act of 1955, which already dictate the ground rules for divorce, spousal support, and child custody. Before we pivot to our next major topic, I want you to ponder this previous year question from 2014 that the source material actually highlights. The life cycle of a joint family depends on economic factors rather than social values. Discuss. It's a great question, right? Are all these sweeping changes we just explored, nuclear families, live-in relationships, rising divorce, are they being driven by our changing morals or simply by the economic realities of surviving in a modern urban world? Keep that tension between economics and social values in the back of your mind. Okay. Let's zoom out to Section 3. Understanding Communalism, a macro-society challenge. The source defines communalism, often referred to as sampradayikta, as the active use of one religious group against other groups and the nation itself. The text explicitly describes it as a restrictive, sectarian, and highly unfavorable reaction to the modernization process and national construction. It's essentially a multidimensional process built on orthodoxy and intolerance, where one group advocates for the abolition of other religions' principles, genuinely believing their own is exclusively superior. Section 4. Stages of escalation. Let's look at the path to extremism.
So how does this society actually get to that point? Well, it doesn't happen overnight. It escalates in stages. It begins at the initial stage, where people of the same religion simply share secular interests, maybe similar political or cultural goals. Then it slowly shifts to the moderate stage, where they begin to believe their secular interests fundamentally differ from those of other faiths within a multi-religious community. Finally, we hit the extreme stage. Here, the interests of different religious communities are perceived not just as different, but as fundamentally incompatible, aggressive, and entirely unfriendly toward one another.
Which brings us to Section 5, Varieties of Communalism, Defining the Threat. The source material categorizes this ideology into 5 distinct definitions. First up is assimilationist communalism. This form focuses inward. It's really about ensuring the welfare of one's own local religious community as the primary importance. Think of a group securing resources, providing education, scholarships, or financial aid exclusively for the members of their specific local religious group, effectively prioritizing their own over the broader national community.
Next, we have retreatist communalism. This is a really fascinating sociological reaction, where a tiny religious group completely withdraws. They distance themselves entirely from the broader political landscape and absolutely any activity that is politically connected. They basically retreat inward to preserve their orthodoxy, away from the reach of the modernizing state.
Now here is where the ideology crosses a very dangerous line into active hostility. With retaliatory communalism, the specific goal is to literally hurt, harm, and injure people who belong to other religious communities. It relies heavily on extremist strategies and violence to assert its dominance and respond to perceived threats. Then we have separatist communalism. In this stage, the goal shifts towards demanding a distinct and separate political identity. The religious group insists on having its own state or autonomous political recognition, drawing hard, non-negotiable lines between us and them within the context of governance. And finally, we reach the absolute extreme, secessionist communalism. This represents the ultimate fracture. The group demands complete secession, totally breaking away from the nation to form a completely independent, sovereign entity. It's essentially advocating for the total abolition of any shared national construction.
Now, the text reminds us that these aren't just abstract academic buzzwords. Communalism has a bloody and very real colonial history in India. It is the exact force that resulted in the division of the country and led to the tragic massacres of the partition riots. And because the real-world consequences of these sociological stages are so extraordinarily severe, the source material places a very heavy responsibility on today's media. The media must be cautious and constructive rather than fanning the flames of division.
So, let's leave it on this thought for today's explainer. We've seen how our personal relationships and familial structures are capable of adapting, modernizing, and even expanding their definitions to survive in the modern world. But as our micro-level lives evolve, what systemic cultural cures will we need to implement to protect our broader societal fabric against the rigid, escalating stages of communalism? How do we ensure that modernization leads to shared prosperity rather than sectarian division? That is absolutely something we all need to consider. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep questioning the world around you.